issues in the past. I don't think I'm ever going to get rid of checking that in the morning and making sure. Well, it's morning here. It's morning here where I'm at. So we will start right on the hour. We're just going to wait for a few more people to enter the webinar room, and then we'll get started. And I also, let's see here, I also want to share these slides with you. So let's do that. And you can access those. They're in the chat section, and they're also in the area called shared files. And that gives you 8 a.m. in Milwaukee. It's 8 a.m. in Houston, Texas. So we are right on the hour. So I'm going to introduce myself again. My name's Judy Bou Kheir. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas. That is in United States. And I'm actually streaming from a suburb of Houston, Texas. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. So where are you coming from? Cairo, Egypt. I've been to Cairo. Vietnam, 8 p.m. in Vietnam. Welcome, Vietnam. London. And let's see, Philippines, 9 p.m. Welcome. Canada, Austria, Florida, Georgia, Singapore, Kentucky, Aurora, Colorado, 9 a.m. North Carolina, New Jersey, Ontario, Canada, north of Dallas, Texas, Tennessee, Michigan, Osaka. Welcome, Osaka, Alabama, Germany. Welcome, Germany. Good morning. Central Texas, North Carolina, Kansas, Chicago, Atlanta, India. Welcome, India and Ohio. And that's the wonderful thing about the internet now. Is like you can gather a group of people from all over the world and share ideas, connect. And that's been a huge blessing in my life, having my family scattered all over the place. So we're going to go ahead and start with me telling you just a little bit about me. I am actually a career educator. So what that means is I got my bachelor's in music theory and composition, did a 5th year of education classes. So just in case I would be able to teach, and I actually retired from teaching here in Texas, and there was a choral director. So started out as a musician, and I still work as a part-time professional musician today. But something happened in my life about 10 years ago, and I went back to graduate school to get a school counseling degree, and then did a year of postgraduate studies in clinical counseling so I could also get my licensure. So I currently hold a certification with the Texas Education Agency as a certified school counselor, and then also hold licensure in the state of Texas as a professional counselor. Now, this next part about me is something that I always like to share at the beginning of a groupinар. I am a person in recovery from a mental health disorder, alcohol use disorder, also known as addiction to alcohol or alcoholism. Those are some of the other terms that people use. The clinical terminology today that is used is alcohol use disorder. My treatment involved inpatient treatment and then stepped down care with partial hospitalization and then intensive outpatient. I also connected to the aftercare program with my treatment facility, and did that for a year. And then I connected with a recovery community where I live, and I am still active in recovery today. So basically, what does that mean? Well, in recovery, you learn a lot of things, but the biggest thing is that you learn better mental health strategies moving forward. So I've had to do a lot of changing to stay in recovery, and those changes are for the better. And one of those things that I learned how to do is explore the idea of forgiveness to other people in my life. And so I'm going to share some personal things about my own journey, what I've uncovered, but also what does the research say about forgiveness? Because I am a professional, and we always look at research outcomes when we do that. So I've been married 36 years to my husband. I have 4 grown children. And if you don't get anything from this groupinnar, Today, I'm hoping that at least whatever's brought you to the platform and the work that you're doing with your own therapist here, I hope that this instills some hope for you for recovery from whatever's brought you here. Um, we're going to start with what to expect from today's groupinar, and I'm just going to read directly from the slides. So here we go. Today's groupinar is designed to give you some information about the historical ideas surrounding forgiveness, as well as the research that's been done on this subject. Forgiveness may be a new idea to many of you. You may not be ready just yet to forgive, and that's okay. Wherever you're at on your own therapy journey, that's a good place to be for today's groupinar. For many, forgiveness is a spiritual journey, but you do not need to be religious to begin the journey into forgiveness. Today's groupinar is not so much about a step-by-step process to forgiveness, although I will introduce toward the last half of the groupinar, I'll introduce a little bit about what it looks like to work through the steps of forgiveness. But it is encouraging you to consider this option for your own recovery. Today's groupinar should be able to get you started on this journey. Now, I want to tell you something, because when I was presenting this, I guess after the first month I started presenting this, I thought, these people that come into this groupinar, you're the brave ones. And I don't just mean about maybe the ungodly time that you're experiencing in your own time zone. Like I had to get up at 4 a.m. to watch this groupinar. It's also that you are considering it, and maybe you have quite a bit of resistance, or you have just some really good reasons as to why a person in your life does not deserve your forgiveness. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So you're in a good place if that's you. All right. So in looking at what we hope to achieve today, here's the goals. We want to understand the historical implications of forgiveness. They are rooted in some religious ideologies. They go back pretty far, in the centuries. And then become familiar with a working definition of forgiveness, have a greater understanding of the benefits of forgiveness. And this is solely your benefit, how it will benefit you, and then recognize the power of forgiving others. And we're going to briefly touch on the idea of self-forgiveness. So we want to do a check-in here real quick. And periodically, I'm going to ask you about this one slide. If you can, just check in with the rest of the group where you are. And so the first one is number one: what happened to me is unforgivable. I will not pursue forgiveness. I am not ready. The thing that happened to me is unforgivable. That's one. All right. And then two is, I'm tired of having the event replay over and over in my head, but I'm unsure how I might be able to forgive. And then three is, I might be ready to consider forgiveness, but just really don't know that much about it. And then, of course, the last one is, I've come here today and I am ready to forgive. That's number four. I will make the decision to forgive after today's groupinar. I'm ready to do it. And some people are already checking in. 2 to 3. Let me see what we've got here. Twos. We've got a lot of twos and threes, ones and twos. It's okay to be a one. Don't be shy if you're a one. 2 to 3. Okay, here's a one. All right, great. 2 and 3, 2 and 3. Somebody is already at a 4. Awesome. Between a 1 and a 2. Fantastic. Thank you. All righty. So let's look first at the definition of unforgiveness. This is something that, and this isn't a clinical definition. This is just some things that I picked up as I was doing the research. So unforgiveness has many repercussions and descriptions. Here's one of them: drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Carrying bitterness and resentment throughout a lifetime. Suppressed anger that undermines mental and physical health. Now, these are just some of the ideas surrounding unforgiveness. So we've got a chance here to just, let's see. Hold on. We want to go to the definition of forgiveness first. Let's get there, and then we'll go to the share section. So I did a lot of research, and actually this groupinar is the result of doing research for a grief and loss groupinar and a grief and loss group that I did at my local church. And we offered a group counseling atmosphere for the community to explore grief and loss. And guess what? One of the things that popped up in my research study was forgiveness. So this comes from a human development study group at the University of Wisconsin. They met weekly for years to explore the concept of forgiveness. And so this is the clinical definition that they came up with: a willingness to abandon one's right to resentment, negative judgment, and indifferent behavior to one who unjustly injured us, while fostering the undeserved qualities of compassion, generosity, and even love toward him or her. That's like a high bar, isn't it? All right, now let's get into the share. So the first thing I want us to explore is the unforgiveness. And I was thinking, as you see me look over to my left, what I'm doing is I'm looking at some notes that I have. And so occasionally I'm going to be reading from those notes. And I thought, okay, so how can you describe unforgiveness? And so I've got just a few situations that most of us might deem are justified for unforgiveness. And here's a few. A murderer who has no remorse for killing his victim. A crime committed against me. The person that I'm looking at to forgive is actually unremorseful. If I forgive, I'm being stupid for forgetting this transgression. And if I forgive, it will happen again. All right. So the first question is there a place where unforgiveness is justified? You can answer that in the chat section. Okay. All right. And then somebody just shared, there's one person I just don't think I can forgive. So maybe a 1 there. Okay. All righty. Is it justified to have unforgiveness? Abuse by parents? Let's see. Same abuse by parents. I really can't. So someone is sharing that maybe that would be justified. I feel forgiving self is dependent on him forgiving me. This is getting quite difficult. Okay, so hopefully this is going to give you a little bit of clarity, this groupinar. So anybody have any thoughts? Just yes or no? Unforgiveness, is it ever justified? Forgiving bullies who never said sorry. Let's see. Maybe it's justified, but it damages the person who can't forgive more than the people it's directed at. And that is exactly why it's a gift you give yourself. That's exactly why you're giving yourself a gift when you forgive. We're going to get more into that. I'm struggling to forgive myself and let of what I've done to my friends and other people. Infidelity is unforgivable. What about if you have more trouble forgiving yourself but easily forgive others? We're going to touch on self-forgiveness as well. All right. And that'll be later on in the groupinar. So just hang on. Let's see. I feel it's justified because you shouldn't allow someone to repeat the same hurtful behavior. So we're going to kind of look at how you can forgive, or exactly this idea of forgiveness and still learning a lesson and still setting a boundary. All right. Now, real quick, before we continue on, Do you have a definition yourself of forgiveness? If you do, would you share that quickly in the chat section? I think it's not about being justified, but more about the impact of the resentments and consequences. Yes, and we're going to look at what the research says about how unforgiveness impacts you, not the other person, but how it impacts you. All right, we're going to look at that. A form of self-love. Here's some definitions of forgiveness: letting go and releasing. That's good. Letting go of hurt and pain. Yes. Feeling at peace with what has happened, no longer giving your energy to the event or person. Right. We all have only so much mental energy. And if that idea is swirling around in your head and it just keeps coming back and causing you anger, bitterness, resentment, that can actually affect your own mental health and your physical health over the long run. Forgiveness is the release of internalized pain. Forgiveness is finding a way forward and letting go of past transgressions. Acceptance is very much intertwined with forgiveness, that there was a mistake made, but the person is admitted to their actions and both parties don't feel resentment. Letting go, but how? Okay, well, hopefully we're going to answer some of those questions today. All right, so let's look at 3 different models that we currently have in research. And one of the earliest models that we see from a historical significance is the religious teaching. So we're going to briefly touch on that. And then in the last 100 years, there's been this idea of 12-step recovery for substance use disorders. And then it's now evolved into all different types of disorders or psychological conditions, the 12-step models. But it had its origins about 85 years ago. And we're going to look briefly at, the 12-step. Now, what happened maybe about 50 years ago with religious teachings and 12-step models is researchers said, hold on a minute, maybe we need to kind of start exploring a little bit more from a psychological perspective. And so psychological research on this issue is fairly new, 50 years in the making, with quite a bit of work done in the last 20 to 30 years. So we're going to look at those. Let's look at religious teachings first. So some of the major religions that we have in the world today: Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, and Hinduism. And let's look at each one of these individually to see what these religious teachings tell us. So Judaism, Selacha, refers to forgiveness of the heart. It is not required by law, but it is an act of mercy, recognizing the humanity of the offender. No reconciliation is required. Now, I'm just going to give you a disclaimer. I am not a religions researcher. I don't have a master's degree in religious teachings or anything like that. This is just from my research about each one of these religions. So please bear with me. So actually, Judaism, the law does not stipulate that you must forgive someone unless they are remorseful. So if they come to you with repentance, you're supposed to be able to forgive them. That is a requirement. But what do you do with the person that has not shown remorse? And so this selacha refers to the forgiveness of the heart. You can choose to forgive someone, although it's not required. In Islam, Allah is merciful and forgiving. But if you pardon, overlook, and forgive their faults, then Allah is truly all forgiving and most merciful. In other words, to seek to be more like Allah, we should adopt those things that encompass Allah's character. Okay, so that's where forgiveness would play a role in this particular religion. Hinduism, God is extremely forgiving by nature. The Bhagavad Gita 10.4 suggests that to achieve a higher state of mind in Hinduism, forgiveness is important. In Buddhism, forgiveness let's see, Kshama in Sanskrit and Kama in Pali is a central concept in Buddhism, and understanding forgiveness is essential to nirvana, the ultimate state of compassion and wisdom all Buddhists hope to attain. And then in Christianity, Christ's death on a cross allows for followers to be forgiven. And then in Jesus's teachings, he said, "For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you." So all of these ideas of forgiveness are present in these particular religions. Now, 12-step models give us a way to recover from. It was basically first introduced in Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a 12-step model of recovery back in the 1930s. And there's particular, just going to give you the current research that's out there. And actually, I'm going to present on this. I've got a new webinar, groupinar that I'm presenting about substance use disorders that hopefully is going to be coming up in August if you're more interested in this concept. But the research that just came out in December about 12-step recovery for substance use disorders says that the outcomes for a person's full recovery are equal to clinical interventions, and even show greater outcomes, so more positive outcomes at the 6-month, 9-month, 1 year, 36, 24 months, 36 months, that they show greater outcomes for sustained recovery. So just giving you that little tidbit on the research. All right, now step 4. So let me just read from my notes because I don't want to miss this. The correlation between 12-step recovery success with remission for substance use disorders can be tied to the overall mental health benefits of 12-step recovery. One step in particular addresses forgiveness, and that's step 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves suggests that recovery is dependent on clearing up past unforgiveness, and they title it resentment, and moving to a place of forgiveness. This work is done by getting rid of all resentments, whether justified. That means that you have a reason to hold on to, that somebody really did hurt you. The evidence is there, and that you are still for the betterment of your own recovery from your substance use disorder, that you need to let go of that. Or just a figment of your imagination. Perhaps you're holding on to resentment when the other person really didn't do anything wrong. You just took a personal offense, and you still need to forgive. So the success of 12-step recovery over the last 80 years, coupled with what we know from religious teachings, is what's led to the current research, psychological research. So here, let's look at that one real quick. Forgiveness research identifies 2 researchers who have been instrumental in studying the concept of forgiveness from a scientific perspective. They are Everett Worthington and Michael McCullough. Research suggests that the ability to forgive is associated with greater relationship satisfaction. Physical health benefits result by less negativity and emotion, freeing the individual to pursue happiness and a more fulfilling life. Now, this is what research tells us. And then if you want more information about Dr. Worthington, he'll show up again on a couple of future slides as we go through this groupinar. You can access his website here, and he has all kinds of freebies on his website, and including some workbooks. All right. Then let me give you the resilience and forgiveness, because I've got a groupinar on building resiliency, and I didn't even address forgiveness because at the time when I was researching, this idea of forgiveness didn't really show up in my own research studies on resiliency, but here you go. Forgiveness is often difficult, and when we are tested and rise to the challenge, it strengthens us. Now, this is one of the leading researchers this is just from what he's found out in his own decades-long study of forgiveness. That strengthening helps us bounce back in the wake of disasters and traumas. Forgiveness can help us become more resilient. All righty. And then finally, so what does research say about forgiveness? Well, here it is. It produces better mental health outcomes over your lifetime. More forgiving individuals have less incidence of physical health problems. Forgiveness builds resiliency, and forgiveness helps reconcile relationships with loved ones. All right, so those are just 4 takeaways from what the research says about the benefits of resiliency. Okay, so now we're going to do a check-in, and here we go. It is where are you right now? I'm pulling that slide back up before we get into what is forgiveness. The second half is going to talk all about forgiveness and what is it. A 3, still at a 1, and that's okay. At least you're here. I mean, you're one of the brave ones, I'm telling you, because you're opening your mind to the possibility, could it be available to me? All right, so just hang tight, stay with us, and thank you for staying. All right, a 3, a 2, and a 3, a 1. There's another one that says 1, a 2. Okay, all righty. Okay, so here we go. The gift of forgiveness. All right, so let's start with analogies. And if you were my client, you would notice over the course of treatment, oh my gosh, she really uses a lot of analogies. I was a teacher, besides being a professional musician, but I was a teacher by trade for decades. And I have found one of the best learning tools is to give an analogy. So bear with me. We're going to look at this hiker on the trail, and then we'll try to make some correlations with the hiker. So our hiker is packing for a long journey. He's carefully packing his backpack and trail gear. He wants to make sure that he carries only what he will truly need for the journey. He doesn't want to underpack, but being mindful, he packs accordingly. Now, let's say this hiker has a penchant for collecting rocks along his journey. And so these rocks are mementos of a particularly harrowing part of the trail where he's like, phew, oh man, I made through it. There's a nice rock that I can just put into my backpack to help me remember what I've been through and how much I've developed during, this hike. As he gets through that experience, he puts the rock from the trail into his backpack. Now, I bet you know what the next slide is going to say. Imagine in just a few days, weeks, or even a month what he's carrying now. Will he be able to complete his journey? Common sense tells us that eventually he will not. One of 3 things can happen. And the first one is he moves much slower with each hour, day, and week until he is no longer effectively moving along the trail. The rocks are starting to impede his journey. At some point, he decides that the trip is too hard and he ends it with disappointment. Or he realizes that the rocks are the problem. They are impeding his journey. And he decides, I'm going to have to get rid of the rocks. Now, you can imagine if the hiker was thinking, oh, this is so wonderful. This reminds me of, when I slipped and I was able to climb myself back up and, I'm going to collect that rock. So there's going to be a little resistance as he moves to this new idea. I've got to get rid of these rocks. They're just not, in the long run of this journey, they are not doing me any good any longer. All right. Forgiveness benefits us by lightening our load. We traverse the life journey with more positive emotions operating. This is the benefit to you, even if you're resistant. This is your benefit, doing it for yourself. We traverse the life journey with more positive emotions operating. The transgressor no longer takes up space and mental energy in our head. We are able to enter into new relationships without the impact of that past transgression affecting our lives. there's a there's a school of thought in psychological theory talking about unfinished business and how you just pack that bag of unfinished business unless you've dealt with it and carry it into your next relationship. And that's the residual effects of maybe even trauma and how that can affect future relationships. While it can take some work to get to a place of forgiveness, it's worth it. Forgiveness benefits you. Now, only answer this question if you feel like you've moved a little bit on that needle from a 1 to a 2 or a 2 to a 3 or a 3 to a 4. Just answer just answer with a yes or no if you've moved. All right. You can share that in the chat section. No, and that's okay. A few people have. Okay. No. Okay. No, I think it's harder for me to forgive myself because my spouse also hasn't forgiven me. And we're going to touch on that. We're going to touch on that in the process a little, mostly yes. Okay. So the first thing that we talked about is the psychological research and encouraging, that it is more beneficial, that there is the psychological research out there. But the second concept that I've just presented is you are, should I say the word selfish? You're thinking selfish. I mean, like, you're being a little selfish when you administer the gift of forgiveness to yourself. You really are letting go so you can be happier and so you can move through life with a more optimistic perspective. And I'm going to tell you, as a person that's had to forgive, even as recently as last year, I realized that I was carrying around some unforgiveness for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years, that this person was still coming back into my head. And every time I thought of that person, I was getting irritated. And I would even kind of replay the event back, and I would get angry about it all over again. And finally, last summer, I said, you know what? I am just going to have to work on forgiving this person. I'm just going to have to let it go. And the only time today, so that was about a year ago, that I did that work last summer on forgiving this one person. And it was actually an administrator when I was teaching, when I was still teaching. And they had done something that, how can I describe that? They had done something that it was like they impugned my character. And I am a person that has a moral compass that I'm very, very aware of, my ethics and morality around my teaching. And anyway, so I had to learn to forgive that person. So the only time it comes up is when I'm sharing it with another person, like I'm doing so today in this groupinar. All righty, so let's look at some of these steps. And I'm giving you a case study with a lady named Jane as we kind of work through this next few series of slides. Now, this is, oh, and there goes Siri on my watch. Sorry about that, in case you could hear. So Uh, you're going to notice that we're not delving deep into each one of these slides, but this just kind of gives you an overview should you decide to go ahead and forgive. All right. So a person's journey into forgiveness starts with the recognition. This is probably the easiest step. You recognize that somebody harmed you. Okay. And you recognize that you've got emotions surrounding it, and you're still holding on to the hurt, the pain, the resentment, the bitterness, the anger, and those things don't seem to be going away. So here we go. This may be in the form of bitterness, blame, resentment. We realize the offense is something that's consuming us. Now, it might not consume 24/7. It might be that it just shows up once or twice during the day. And then you start having that sinking feeling and you're saying, why can I not just let go of this thing? Why is it still bugging me? We may think of ways, you may think of ways in which you can retaliate. I mean, I certainly did. I was even thinking maybe legal action, because it was just so egregious what happened to me, in my head, right? In recalling the offense, the first thing that's helpful is writing about it. So let's look at Jane. Jane wants to be able to move on from this relationship. Oh, hold on. Jump the gun. Here we go. In journaling about the event, sorry, that was the second slide on my notes. In journaling about the event, write down the name of the offender, then write about what happened, what actually happened to you. Journal about how it affected you. So, did it cause you financial harm? Did it cause you emotional harm? Did it cause you physical harm? Were your rights violated? And then describe in more detail what way. So let's take a look at Jane, a woman who's been divorced for 2 years from her husband. She is still angry and bitter over one of the things that happened with her ex when they were still married. And so here's what happened. Jane reports that years ago, her husband made a significant financial decision without her knowledge or consent. When Jane was reviewing the joint checking account, she noticed $4,000 that was taken out of the account by her husband. She was shocked when she found the money missing. Her husband violated her trust. She felt confused and betrayed. Since she works hard at her job and she's also a financial contributor to the family, she felt that he had minimized her financial contribution to the family and was inconsiderate. So here she is, she's journaling about all those things. She's identifying emotions. She's writing down exactly what he did, and then she's writing down how it affected her. Now, the second thing that we look at, or the second, if you want to call them steps into forgiveness, or at least into Jane's forgiveness journey, recognizes that we may choose to work through forgiveness, and a decision to forgive can be made. You can be reluctant with a decision. Think about in your own life experience. You can be reluctant with a decision, but then after you've made it and you've taken an action, you might say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I went ahead and did that. That's the best thing I could have ever done. A lot of times we'll be reluctant out of fear. For example, years ago, I went to go visit my son. He was living in San Francisco at the time. He's since moved to another location in the Bay Area in California, but he's a web developer out in California. And so I took a whole week off. It was when I was still teaching. It was spring break. And I just said, I'm coming for a visit. And he said, great, Mom, come on. And he had the whole week planned. He was still working every day. So I had my own little activities. I went, to local places. I brought books to read. I exercised. He was living in a high rise. There was all kinds of stuff in the high rise that I availed myself of. And anyway, one of the days he said, okay, today we're going to go on a bike ride. Well, I hadn't gone on a bike in like 10 years. And so now here's my decision. Am I going to get in my, because I'm 62 now. So we're talking about I was in my 50s. Am I going to get, I haven't been on a bike in 10 years. Am I going to get on a bike and actually ride around San Francisco? I mean, I'm not going to say downtown San Francisco, because San Francisco encompasses 7 square miles, according to my son. So I made the decision, even gripped with fear. And then after the first 5 minutes of being on that bike, the word for that was exhilarating. And you better believe that I was so happy that I went through that decision. But I didn't know until I made the decision what would happen. So I was reluctant, extremely reluctant to make the decision, but I'm so glad I did. All right, so let's look at Jane. Jane wants to be able to move on from this relationship with her ex and realizes that she may have to look at her part. Sometimes our part of the situation is learning from it. See, it's what did you learn? And then you also affirm your power that it won't happen in the future when you have a learning outcome from what someone else may do. Sometimes our part of the situation is learning from it. Jane's sole focus of only looking at this situation and how she was wronged. See, she was a little bit stuck. She kept ruminating over and over what he did and how it affected her and how she was victimized by him. And she made a choice to turn that around a little bit and look at it from a different perspective. So her sole focus of only looking at the situation and how she was victimized was not helping her in the long run. It resulted in self-pity and kept her stuck in bitterness. She was brave enough to let go of that and say, hold on a minute, this is difficult, but let me see if I can't get a different perspective on this. She looked at what she could have done. She realized that she didn't check the account often, so she could have been more diligent about that and been more responsible with that. She also realized that his action was part of a pattern in the marriage, and because of her lack of boundaries, he had taken advantage of her. She started to realize and gain some of her power back because she let go of self-pity and victimization. Now, while she's no longer married, she began to acknowledge that her ex-husband had his problems, and some of those problems had affected her. But they were also problems that she couldn't fix. All righty. Now, the third step understands that forgiveness is an individual journey to healing. That means that no two people take that journey exactly alike. Some people are more ready than others. Some people may take a while coming to the decision. All right. And then some people may decide that, I'm going for it, and they finish their forgiveness work fairly quickly. Forgiveness is an individual journey. We begin the work so that the decision becomes an emotional reality. So one thing that Dr. Everett noticed in his research over the decades that he's been researching forgiveness is that there's 2 types of forgiveness. There's decisional forgiveness, where you actually make the decision even though emotionally you may feel incapable of forgiving. And just by making the decision to take some action steps, such as the ones we're just briefly perusing through right now, okay, eventually turns into emotional forgiveness. In other words, your decision in your head to forgive eventually becomes forgiveness of the heart. So you make a decision to forgive. Were there lessons learned in the situation that hurt you? What were they? Do the lessons promote self-growth? Will you be careful to establish proper boundaries in the future? Will you work to have more realistic expectations of others? How did this event create a personal growth journey for you? These are all self-empowerment statements. They're self-affirming statements that build self-esteem and self-love, because you've turned something horrible that's happened to you into something where you learned life lessons and you're better prepared for someone down the road that might exhibit the same types of traits, and you're far more careful. In other words, you're not reactive to another person. You've done your work working through the situation. So you're not reactive. Okay, from trauma, you're responsive now. All right, so let's look at Jane. Since Jane didn't want her ex-husband to live in her head forever, she made the decision to forgive. In this forgiveness was her ownership in the decision of forgiveness. Jane told her most trusted friends that she had made a decision to forgive her ex. These friends held her accountable to her word. She also worked on improving her ability to protect herself from future events like this. Remember, not out of being reactive, but actually out of learning the skills of setting proper boundaries and understanding herself better and what her rights were. She realized that it was okay to be more discerning regarding relationships, and that earning her trust didn't have to be a given at the onset of a relationship. She empowered herself. And then, lastly, commit to walk in forgiveness. When the offense or offender enters your mind, remind yourself, I have chosen to walk in forgiveness with this person. If you have a spiritual connection to a God of your understanding, enlist the help from that source through prayer and spiritual readings. That's just an added source for those of you that have some type of a religious teaching that you ascribe to. You do not have to be associated with any kind of religious teaching to get benefit from forgiveness. I just want to emphasize that. But if you do have a religion that you ascribe to, you definitely can use that as a resource. Hold yourself accountable to a friend or loved one. Remember that grace is the ability to extend compassion, although it hasn't been earned, nor is it deserved. It is the gift you give yourself. So finally, when we make a decision, what usually happens next is action. And this is what Jane did. Jane's action was immediately addressing her thoughts when they started to go down the bitterness road. And so this is what she would tell herself. She reminded herself, hold on a minute. That's old thinking. I've chosen to walk in forgiveness with this person. It's important to note that while the old thoughts and emotions would arrive, she didn't deny that they were there. She didn't try to stuff them back down and say, no, I'm going to be a forgiving person. No, she acknowledged that they happened. And as soon as those thoughts came up, she told herself, I'm not going there. I'm not going there any longer. I've chosen to walk in forgiveness with my ex-husband. She acknowledged them, but chose to turn back to forgiveness. Now, as I shared with you, even most recently, a year ago, that I decided to forgive someone from like something 3 or 4 years ago that happened. This practice of recognizing when the thoughts will float back up, I would immediately talk to the thought, the old thought, and I'd say, no, not going there. That serves me no purpose. I have chosen to think positively, moving forward in my life, and I have chosen to forgive this person. And by the way, that administrator was not remorseful for what they did. Now, you might think that that's poor leadership. I certainly do. But a person does not have to be remorseful in my life today for me to be able to forgive them. All right. In fact, I run into quite a few people like that. All right. So that gives you in a nutshell the just a perusal of the steps to forgiveness. Now, here in Dr. Everett Worthington's work, he's got a model of forgiveness called the Reach Forgiveness Model. And this is just a brief description of his model. Recall the event, try to be as objective as possible. Notice that he says, do not wallow in self-pity. Now, I don't know about you, but I can get offended by someone telling me that I am just experiencing self-pity when I really feel hurt by something. But guess what? In the last 10 years of my recovery journey, I have come to find out that I have operated most of my adult life feeling sorry for myself. And it has kept me in a victim role and a victim mentality. And I am here to tell you today that I absolutely do not go to self-pity. Now, do I acknowledge when I'm feeling sad, angry? When someone had, last night, I've been married 36 years, when my husband yelled at me about something because I was irritating him by continuing to ask him a question over and over, right? Um, I experienced my emotion in the midst of it. It went off to the bedroom to process my own emotions. Okay. And he comes in like 10, 15 minutes later after he had finished. He says, honey, I'm so sorry. I'm just, I was working on something and you just kept pestering me. And yeah, everything was good. Everything was good. I did not wallow in self-pity. I've learned that about myself. All right. Empathize with the perpetrator. That really raises. Now remember, this is just the brief overview, and he's got a whole workbook that gets you to these points. All right. So this is just the brief overview. Understand that hurting people can hurt others. When in a heightened state, people will lash out. Okay, so in my own journey, the empathize for me was recognizing that I am 30 years older than this administrator. I have a lot more life experience, and they erred. But again, it is not my place to tell them how to do their job. All right. Altruism considers the well-being of others. Commit yourself to forgive publicly. We touched on that briefly in our last few slides. Have an accountability partner, and finally hold on to the forgiveness, which is kind of what I shared with you. I am walking in forgiveness. I have chosen this path, and that's where I'm headed. I am not going down I'm not letting my mind go down to relive the event. I have chosen to walk in forgiveness and move on. All right. So not denying what happened, but rather choosing a different caption. And my caption today for that event that happened years ago, she was young, she erred, I can move on. All right. So that is the Reach Forgiveness. Now let's talk real quickly about forgiving ourselves. Sometimes in life, we hold ourselves accountable for situations which were not our responsibility. So you need to get clarity. Are you really responsible when someone is angry with you? Did you just err? Did you just make a mistake? All right. Or did they decide because of their own faulty, maybe their own mental health, They're blaming you for something that for which you really hold no responsibility. So if we were blamed or someone angrily accuses us of an action, we can dig deeper to find out whether you should truly be responsible. So that's the first work. Now, I tell my clients all the time, remember analogies? I have an analogy called my side of the street. You stay on your side of the street and only be responsible for what you have truly, if you erred in judgment or made a mistake, that's okay. Humans are fallible. We make mistakes. When you think of a mistake, you learn from the mistake, and then that gives you the power to correct it, right? So you're responsible on your side of the street for your thoughts, responses, actions, and emotions. If someone brings their blame box over to your side of the street, ask yourself, am I really to blame for their emotions? Now, if you're having a hard time forgiving yourself because someone is not forgiving you, remind yourself that I have done everything that I can do. Just because they don't forgive me doesn't mean that I can't forgive myself. I have honestly done everything I can do to repair this relationship. I need to let go. I've got to let them stay over on their side of the street. I cannot take their blame box. Sometimes we are hardest on ourselves. This is another place where we may be unforgiving of ourselves. We may feel guilt, shame, remorse over something we've done and cannot forgive ourselves. Now, I was raised, a lot of times things come up in childhood. Our parents consciously teach us things in childhood, but they also unconsciously impart learning experiences. And I was taught early on that having adults angry with me was a really, really bad thing for me emotionally, that that people in my life would abandon me emotionally if they were angry with me. Now, you can imagine what kind of mess I was when I came into my 30s, my early 30s, and worked with a long-term therapist for 3 years. Okay? So I learned in that situation that I don't have to bear guilt, shame, and remorse because of someone else's emotional problems, their own emotional energy. I stay on my side of the street. Journal about the instance for which you are holding yourself accountable. Realize that because we are human, we all make mistakes. Find the lesson learned so you can get some self-growth out of it. Commit to do better next time. Extend grace toward yourself as you would for a dear friend or family member. Forgiveness is, here's some wonderful quotes about forgiveness. To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you. I think the first step is to understand that forgiveness does not exonerate the perpetrator. Remember, they're still held accountable. What forgiveness does is liberate the victim. When you hold resentment toward another, you are bound to that person or condition by an emotional link that is stronger than steel. Forgiveness is the only way to dissolve that link and get free. All righty. We're toward the end of our groupinar, and we're going to let you check in one last time. Give me a number. Did you get further? A 4, okay. Somebody's ready to go there. A 2 to a 3, a 4 with an exclamation. Somebody's at a 2 now, a 3. I did more to a 3 or 4 now, and it's okay if you're still at a 1 because at least you've stayed for the whole thing. So give yourself a pat on the back if you're still at a 1. It's okay. A 3, 4 with the tools you've shared. A 2, great. I really want to forgive, but don't know how to. I'm going to share some resources for you. This was so helpful. Okay, closer with this definitely and want to journal. Perfect. So you can do that work with your therapist. All right, so here we go. here's the biggest resource that I'm going to be able to offer you right now. There's a do-it-yourself workbook. I have given it to my own clients. It is called Your Path to Reach Forgiveness, Become a More Forgiving Person in Less Than 2 Hours. And it is free for you to download. So you can start there. There's also a worksheet on forgiveness, and you can ask your therapist, could you please send me that worksheet? I've perused through the worksheet. It's a good way to get started. Remember, it starts with the decision. You don't have to feel forgiving towards someone to eventually get there emotionally. That's really a big, huge takeaway I hope that you've gotten from today's presentation. All right. And thank you. Thanks for being one of the brave ones that you actually came to the Groupinar, you stayed. And even if you don't want to forgive the person, at least you're acknowledging, okay, you've opened, in other words, which this is a big thing about change, you slightly crack open that door to open-mindedness. All right. So thank you everyone for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you. All righty. Bye for now.